Welcome to Moonlit Romance Library. Please follow for more stories. Chapter 1: The Hall of the Moon Vow. The Moon Vow Hall of the Black Pine Pack had stood for 400 years, and in all that time, no Luna had ever been replaced in front of her own people on the night of her own renewal ceremony while wearing the ceremonial silver she had polished herself that morning. Seraphine Marlowe had that honor. She stood at the foot of the moonstone dais where she had stood every winter for 6 years, her golden hair braided with pine sprigs in the old way, and watched her mate, her alpha, her first love, the man whose fever she had once. Welcome to Moonlit Romance Library. Please follow for more stories. Chapter 1: The Hall of the Moon Vow. The Moon Vow Hall of the Black Pine Pack had stood for 400 years, and in all that time, no Luna had ever been replaced in front of her own people on the night of her own renewal ceremony while wearing the ceremonial silver she had polished herself that morning. Seraphine Marlowe had that honor. She stood at the foot of the moonstone dais where she had stood every winter for 6 years, her golden hair braided with pine sprigs in the old way, and watched her mate, her alpha, her first love, the man whose fever she had once sweated out of him with her own hands for 9 straight nights, walk into the hall with another woman on his arm. The whispers started before Roderick even reached the dais. They rolled through the packed hall like wind through wheat. "Who is that?" "A northern lady. Look at the fur on her cloak. That's white winter fox. That's a fortune on her shoulders. Where is she supposed to stand? There's only one place for a woman to stand up there." Roderick Blackpine was, as always, devastatingly handsome. That was the cruelest part. If he had been ugly, if he had been dull or coarse or weak-jawed, Seraphine might have convinced herself she had never really loved him. But Roderick was tall and dark-haired and built like a war poem, with gray eyes that could make a woman forget her own name when they softened, which they used to do, often, when he looked at her. They did not soften now. He walked with the northern woman past the long tables where Seraphine had arranged the winter feast herself. The roast venison she had traded 2 bolts of good linen to secure, the root vegetables from the cellar she had reorganized in September, the honey mead she had bartered from the river merchants using a credit line she had personally guaranteed. He walked past all of it as though it had appeared by magic, and he stopped at the foot of the dais, and he did not look at Seraphine. "Members of the Black Pine Pack," Roderick said, and his voice filled the hall the way it always did, like a bell rung inside a cathedral. "Honored elders, bonded families. Tonight is the night of the moon vow, when the Alpha reaffirms his bond and presents his Luna to the watching moon." Seraphine's hands were steady at her sides. She had rehearsed her part. She would step forward, Roderick would take her hand, they would speak the old words, and the winter would be sealed. She had done this 5 times before. She knew the cadence of it, the way she knew her own heartbeat. "Tonight," Roderick continued, "I present a new bond." The hall went so quiet that Seraphine heard a log shift in the great fireplace 30 feet away. "Lady Alara Winterbourne, of the Northern Winterbourne family, has accepted the position of Luna of the Black Pine Pack." The woman beside him stepped forward, and Seraphine got her first real look at the person who was replacing her. Alara Winterbourne was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, precise, polished, and utterly without warmth. She had dark auburn hair coiled at the base of her neck, skin like parchment that had never seen honest sun, and eyes the color of frozen river water. She wore white winter fox across her shoulders and a gown of midnight blue velvet that must have cost more than the Black Pine Pack's entire autumn grain budget. Her hands were folded in front of her, and her expression was one of serene, practiced modesty, the kind of modesty that says, "I have already won, and I am being gracious about it." She was also, Seraphine noticed with a clarity that surprised her, wearing a betrothal chain that had been forged at least 3 months ago. The silver had already developed the specific patina that comes from being worn daily against skin. 3 months. Roderick had been planning this for 3 months, through the autumn harvest that Seraphine had managed, through the Salt Road dispute that Seraphine had negotiated, through the silver mine transport crisis that Seraphine had solved by riding out to the mountain pass herself in early snow. 3 months of smiling at her across the breakfast table, of accepting her reports on grain stores, of letting her work herself raw to hold his pack together, while this chain cooled against another woman's throat. Seraphine looked at Roderick. For the first time since he had entered the hall, he looked back. She saw it in his eyes. Not cruelty, not hatred, not even indifference. Something worse. Relief. He was relieved to be done with her. Not because he had never loved her. He had. She knew that with the certainty of 6 years of shared nights and whispered promises and the specific way he used to press his face against her hair and breathe her in like she was the only clean air in the world. He had loved her. But loving Seraphine Marlowe came with a price that Roderick Blackpine had decided he could no longer afford. She was too competent, too necessary, too much. When Aluna runs the grain stores and the salt road and the medicine supply and the merchant contacts and the elder relationships, the Alpha starts to feel like a figurehead. When Aluna solves crises faster than the Alpha hears about them, the pack starts to look at her first and him second. When Aluna is brilliant and capable and golden-haired and universally respected, the Alpha starts to wonder if his pack is really his pack or hers. Roderick had found a solution. He had found Aluna who came with an army, a treasury, and a family name that would make other packs think twice before challenging him, and who would, by all appearances, be content to stand at his side and look decorative. It was, from a certain angle, almost reasonable. From where Seraphine was standing, it was the most breathtaking betrayal she had ever experienced, and she had once watched a merchant try to sell her a crate of sawdust labeled as cinnamon. "Seraphine," Roderick said, and his voice was careful now, the way it got when he was handling something he expected to break. "I know this is not what you anticipated for tonight's ceremony. I want you to know that your years of service to this pack—" "Service," Seraphine repeated, and the word came out flat and precise, like a coin dropped on stone. "Are deeply valued. A home has been prepared for you at the eastern edge of the territory, near the border crossing. It's comfortable, warm. You'll receive a monthly allowance and—" "The eastern border cottage," Seraphine said. "The one with the leak in the north wall that I submitted a repair request for in August, which was denied because, and I am quoting your steward, there are higher priorities for the carpentry budget." A small, horrible silence. Elder Marin, seated at the front table, made a sound that was very carefully not a laugh. "The cottage has been repaired," Roderick said tightly. "How wonderful. It only took replacing your Luna to get a roof patched." Seraphine's voice was perfectly level. She was aware, with the strange, doubled vision that comes in moments of absolute crisis, that every person in this hall was watching her for the breakdown. They were waiting for tears, for begging, for the satisfying spectacle of a discarded woman falling apart in public so that everyone could feel sorry for her and then go back to their venison. She would not give them that. She would give them something much worse. "You mentioned my years of service," Seraphine said, and she reached into the embroidered belt pouch at her waist, the one she had sewn herself, the one that contained the tools of every function she had performed for this pack for 6 years. "Let me return what belongs to the position." She pulled out a heavy iron key on a leather cord. The granary key. Main store, reserve store, emergency winter reserve. She placed it on the edge of the dais. "The river merchants renew the winter grain credit in 11 days. They renew it with me because I am the one who has paid them, fed their drivers, and kept their caravans safe for 6 years. If I am no longer Luna, 40% of your winter grain stops at the river." The hall went quiet enough for the fire to sound loud. She drew out a small leather medicine ledger. "The Ashwick herb women supply our feverfew, willow bark, and wound seal poultice. Their payment is due in 6 days. They do not extend credit to men who remember sick rooms only when they need a heroic speech beside one." She set the ledger beside the key. "Without this, the deep winter comes with no fever medicine and no wound treatment." Then came a wooden passage token stamped with pine and road. "The Salt Road Agreement. Renewed 9 days ago in my name because Greymarch trusts the woman who actually sends the wagons on time." The token clicked against the stone. If I am removed, this token dies in 30 days. 3 objects: grain, medicine, road. Even the oldest grandmother in the hall could count them, and every person understood what they meant: food, survival, and a way out of winter. Seraphine left the rest in her pouch. The firewood contracts, the tallow notes, the cobbler favors, the elder grudges, the little human details that made a pack function. She would not drown the room in paper. She would let them discover those losses one by one when the first child needed boots and the first hearth ran cold. There, Seraphine said. The position of Luna returned in full. She looked at Alara Winterbourne, who was standing very still, her pale eyes moving over the key, the medicine ledger, and the road token with an expression Seraphine recognized. The expression of a woman doing rapid mental arithmetic and not liking the sum. "I'm sure Lady Winterbourne will find it manageable," Seraphine said pleasantly. "She looks like a woman who enjoys a challenge." Roderick's jaw was tight. "Seraphine, this display is unnecessary." "Is it?" She turned to him, and for the first time something hot flickered in her golden brown eyes. "You are replacing me in front of the entire pack on the night of the moon vow. You have been planning this for at least 3 months, based on the age of Lady Winterbourne's betrothal chain. You did not tell me. You did not warn me. You let me organize this feast, polish the ceremonial silver, braid my hair in the old way, and walk into this hall believing I was still your Luna. If anyone in this room is putting on an unnecessary display, Roderick, it is not me." The silence was so complete that Seraphine heard Elder Marin's knuckles crack. "You may keep the eastern border cottage," Seraphine said, "and the monthly allowance. I will not be a pensioned-off inconvenience living at the edge of your territory, tending a garden while your new Luna wears my ceremonial silver and pretends she knows where the salt comes from." She reached up and unclipped the thin silver chain at her throat, the Luna's chain, the one Roderick had clasped there 6 years ago with shaking hands and wet eyes. She set it on the dais with the rest. "What I will take," she said, "are my personal effects, my private account ledger, my correspondence, and my own savings, which I earned through personal trade commissions before I was your Luna and which are mine by law." Roderick's face had gone through several colors during her speech. It had settled on a pale, rigid mask that Seraphine knew meant he was furious and knew he had no right to be. "Where will you go?" he asked. "That," Seraphine said, "is no longer your concern." She turned and walked toward the great doors of the Moonvow Hall. The crowd parted for her, not out of respect, not yet, but out of the universal human instinct to get out of the way of a woman who is clearly capable of setting a building on fire with nothing but her organizational skills. Behind her, she heard Alara Winterbourne's voice for the first time, soft and musical and perfectly modulated. "Should someone go after her?" And Roderick's voice, tight and defensive. "She'll be fine, she always is." Seraphine's fingers curled into fists at her sides, her nails biting into her palms. The pain was useful. It kept her spine straight and her eyes dry for the 47 steps it took to cross the hall, push open the iron-banded doors, and step into the freezing November night. The doors closed behind her. She made it to the courtyard wall before her knees buckled. Chapter 2: The Border and the Rabbit. The pain of a severed mate bond is not metaphorical. Seraphine had read about it in the old texts, the scrolls she had cataloged and preserved in the Black Pine Archive, because no one else thought the archive was worth maintaining. The texts described it as a rending of the soul thread, which she had always thought was poetic exaggeration. It was not poetic exaggeration. It hit her 3 miles past the border marker, where Black Pine territory ended and the wild borderlands began. She was walking fast, her winter cloak pulled tight, her satchel of account ledgers and correspondence banging against her hip, her breath coming in sharp white clouds. The November rain had started an hour ago, thin and bitter and relentless. The kind of rain that doesn't soak you all at once, but seeps in through every seam until you realize you are wet to the bone and your fingers have stopped working. The bond snapped like a bowstring. Seraphine gasped, stumbled, and went down on her hands and knees in the mud of the border road. The pain was enormous, not in one place but everywhere, as though every nerve in her body had been stripped raw and dragged across gravel. Her wolf, the silver wolf that lived behind her ribs, howled, a long, thin, terrible sound that only she could hear. "He does not want us." She pressed her forehead to the mud and breathed. Rain ran down her neck, under her collar, along her spine. Her fingers clawed at the ground. The account ledger in her satchel, the one she had refused to leave behind, the one that contained every debt, every credit, every supply line, every contact, every piece of information that made the Black Pine Pack a functioning entity, rather than a collection of wolves arguing over scraps, pressed its leather corner into her ribs like a second heartbeat. She did not let go of it. She got up. She wiped her face, which accomplished nothing because the rain immediately replaced everything she had wiped away. She picked up her satchel, slung it across her body, and kept walking. The borderway station appeared through the rain like a smudge of warm light, a low stone building with a thatched roof and a stable yard, sitting at the junction of the East Road and the old trade path that ran south to the river towns. It was not a grand building. It was the kind of place where traveling merchants, lone riders, and border wolves stopped for a hot meal and a dry corner before continuing into uncertain territory. Seraphine pushed open the door and was hit by the smell of wood smoke, mutton stew, and wet dog. The common room was half full. A few merchants hunched over their bowls, a pair of border guards playing dice, an old woman knitting in the chimney corner. No one looked up. In the borderlands, people minded their own business. It was safer that way. The innkeeper, a stout woman with arms like fence posts and a face that suggested she had once headbutted a mule and the mule had lost, looked Seraphine up and down. "Room? If you have one." "Last one on the left, upstairs. 3 coppers, suppers included. You look like you need it." Seraphine paid. Her fingers were shaking, but she counted the coins accurately. She would always count coins accurately. The world could end, and Seraphine Marlowe would die with her accounts balanced. She climbed the stairs, found the room, a narrow cell with a straw mattress, a woolen blanket, and a window that looked out onto the stable yard, and sat on the bed. She did not cry. She sat very still with her hands on her account ledger and waited for the trembling to stop. It did not stop. She went back downstairs. The kitchen was accessible through a side door that someone had left propped open with a brick. Seraphine told herself she was looking for hot water for her face, or perhaps a candle, or perhaps any small practical task that would give her hands something to do besides shake. What she found behind the kitchen's back door, in the narrow, muddy alley where the kitchen scraps were thrown, was a rabbit. It was small and white and round, with ears that were slightly too long for its body and eyes the color of dark cherries. It was sitting in the rain next to an overturned crate, and it was eating a cabbage leaf, or rather, it was clutching a cabbage leaf in its mouth with the grim, unshakable determination of a creature that had decided this cabbage leaf was the hill it would die on, while the kitchen boy, a lanky teenager with a dripping nose, tried to shoo it away with a broom. "Get off. That's not for you, you stupid. Go on, get." The boy swiped the broom at the rabbit. The rabbit did not move. It hunched lower over its cabbage leaf and chewed faster. "I said get." Another swipe. The rabbit dodged the broom with a small, indignant hop and resumed chewing. The cabbage leaf was now considerably smaller, but the rabbit showed no intention of surrendering what remained. "You little," the boy raised the broom higher. "Stop." Seraphine's voice came out sharper than she intended. The boy turned, saw a golden-haired woman standing in the kitchen doorway with rain in her hair and murder in her eyes, and prudently lowered the broom. "It's just a rabbit, miss. It keeps getting into the vegetable stores." "Then fix the latch on your vegetable stores." Seraphine walked past the boy, crouched in the mud. She was already so wet and filthy that a little more made no difference, and looked at the rabbit. The rabbit looked at her. It had stopped chewing. The cabbage leaf hung from its mouth like a limp green flag. Its dark cherry eyes were very round, and its nose was twitching in the rapid, assessing way that rabbits' noses twitch when they are deciding whether a new person is a threat, a friend, or irrelevant. Seraphine held out her hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. She did not move. She barely breathed. The rabbit considered her for a long moment. Then it hopped forward, one small, careful hop, and pressed its nose against her fingertips. Its nose was cold and wet and impossibly soft, and it twitched 3 times against her skin before the rabbit apparently decided that Seraphine was acceptable. It hopped into her lap. It was warm, absurdly warm the way small animals always are, as though they contain a furnace somewhere beneath their fur that is wildly out of proportion to their size. It settled against her stomach, tucked its feet underneath itself, and continued eating the cabbage leaf. Seraphine sat in the mud in the rain behind a border way station kitchen, holding a rabbit that had been thrown out of the only place it knew for the crime of trying to feed itself, and she thought, well, we match. She carried it inside. No one stopped her. The innkeeper looked at the rabbit, looked at Seraphine's face, and said nothing. There were some faces you did not argue with. Upstairs, Seraphine set the rabbit on the bed. It explored the blanket with the thorough, methodical intensity of a creature cataloging its new territory, circled 3 times, and flopped onto its side. Seraphine sat beside it, opened her account ledger, and began to read. The numbers were familiar, comforting. Every line in this ledger represented a relationship she had built, a deal she had struck, a crisis she had solved. The river merchants, the Salt Road Passage, the Heartwood Carriers Guild, the Herb Women of Ashwick, the quarterly grain deliveries, the winter tallow supply, the emergency credit line with the Greymark banking house. These were hers, not Roderick's, not the Blackpine Pack's, hers. She had built them with her own mind, her own hands, her own relentless competence. And when Roderick Blackpine stood in his Moonvow Hall with his beautiful northern bride and realized that his granary was emptying, his salt road was closing, his medicine supply was vanishing, his silver mine wagons were not arriving, and his elders were asking uncomfortable questions about where the woman who actually ran everything had gone, these relationships would still be hers. The rabbit nudged its nose against her ankle. She reached down and stroked its ears without looking, her eyes still on the ledger. "I'm going to need a name for you," she said. The rabbit thumped one hind leg against the mattress. A small, decisive thump, the sound a rabbit makes when it is either content or staking a claim. "Clover," Seraphine said, "because you are small, round, and apparently impossible to uproot." Clover thumped again and went to sleep. Chapter 3. The Border Wolf King. The rain stopped sometime before dawn. Seraphine knew this because she had not slept. The broken bond ached in her chest like a cracked rib, pulsing with every heartbeat, and she had heard every shift in the weather, every creak of the building, every snore from the common room below. She heard the riders arrive at first light. Not merchants. Merchants traveled in carts. These were mounted riders, heavy horses, moving in formation. She heard the jingle of tack, the low murmur of voices accustomed to command, and distantly, the whine of wolves. Border wolves, big ones, from the sound of their vocal range. Seraphine was dressed and packed in 3 minutes. She had not unpacked much. She was a woman who understood that situations could change quickly, and she kept her belongings in a state of permanent readiness. The only concession to the night was that Clover was now riding in the front fold of her cloak, a warm white lump against her collarbone, ears flat, nose twitching. She came down the stairs with her satchel on her hip, her golden hair in a single damp braid, her spine straight, and her face arranged in the polite, competent mask she had worn for 6 years of managing a pack that did not appreciate her. The common room was full of soldiers. Not soldiers in the ragged, improvised way that pack warriors sometimes were. These were uniformed, dark leather and gray wool, steel-reinforced bracers, weapons that were clean and oiled and clearly used regularly. They moved with the easy discipline of men who had been well-trained and well-fed, and who answered to someone they genuinely respected rather than merely feared. At the center of the room, seated at the largest table with a map spread before him and a cup of tea steaming at his elbow, was the most handsome man Seraphine had ever seen. She was irritated by this. She had just been publicly humiliated, thrown out of her home, and severed from her mate bond. Her clothes were mud-stained, her hair was a disaster, and she had a rabbit in her cloak. She was not in the mood to notice that a man was handsome, but the universe, apparently, did not care about her mood. He was tall, taller than Roderick, which she would not have thought possible, since Roderick's height had been one of his most weaponized attributes. His hair was dark, nearly black, cut shorter than the black pine fashion, and his jaw was the kind of jaw that made portrait painters weep with gratitude. He had a scar that ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, not disfiguring, merely interesting, the kind of scar that suggested a story worth hearing. His eyes were a deep, startling blue, and they were currently fixed on the map in front of him with an expression of calm, focused intelligence that Seraphine recognized because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. He looked up. Their eyes met. Seraphine felt absurdly as though the floor had tilted. Not dramatically, not the sweeping, world-stopping way the bards described it. Just a small, subtle shift, as though gravity had quietly rearranged itself around a new center. The man's blue eyes moved from her face to her mud-stained cloak, to the satchel on her hip, specifically to the account ledger visible through the satchel's unbuckled flap, and back to her face. His expression did not change, but something in his gaze sharpened, the way a blade sharpens when it finds the right angle against a whetstone. "You're the Black Pine Luna," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement, delivered in a voice like dark oak, deep, steady, and suggesting structural integrity. "Former," Seraphine corrected. "As of when?" "Last night." One of the soldiers near the door glanced up. The innkeeper, who had been very carefully pretending to polish a mug, stopped pretending. The man at the table studied her for a moment longer. Then he said, "Sit down." "I don't know who you are." "Cale Ashbourne, Alpha of the Iron Ridge Border Pack, Lord Warden of the Eastern March." He paused. "Some people call me the Border Wolf King, which is dramatic, but not entirely inaccurate." Seraphine had heard of him. Everyone had heard of him. Cale Ashbourne held the borderlands between the settled Pack territories and the wild country to the east, a vast, ungoverned stretch of mountain, forest, and trade road that every merchant, every caravan, and every supply chain had to cross. He controlled the passes, the bridges, the river crossings, and the way station network. He was, in practical terms, the man who decided what moved through the borderlands and what did not. He was also, she realized with a start, the man who had been quietly investigating irregularities on the northern trade roads for the past 6 months. She knew this because the Heartwood Carriers Guildmaster had mentioned it, nervously, in his last letter to her. "Sit down," he said again, and this time it was softer. Not a command, an offer. She sat. Clover, disturbed by the change in altitude, shifted inside her cloak. A tiny white ear poked above Seraphine's collar, rotated once like a small furry periscope, and disappeared back into the fabric. Cale Ashbourne looked at the place where the ear had been. He looked at Seraphine. One corner of his mouth moved by approximately 1/16 of an inch. "Is there a rabbit in your cloak?" he asked. "There might be." "Does it have a name?" "Clover." "Of course it does." He took a sip of his tea. "You crossed the border last night, in the rain, without escort, with a broken mate bond and—" his eyes dropped to her satchel again, "what appears to be a full set of commercial account records." "I was not offered an escort. I was offered a leaking cottage and a monthly allowance." "And you chose the rain." "The rain doesn't condescend to me." That 1/16 of an inch movement at the corner of his mouth happened again. Seraphine was beginning to suspect it was his version of a smile. "I've been watching the Black Pine Pack's trade activity for 6 months, he said. Specifically, the northern supply contracts that changed hands after the Winterborn betrothal was announced. Grain prices tripled on the Black Pine purchase orders. The Salt Road usage fees doubled. The silver mine transport contract was renegotiated with a penalty clause that didn't exist before. He paused. All of these changes happened after Lady Winterbourne's family began their involvement with the Black Pine Pack, and all of the original contracts that kept prices stable were negotiated by one person. He looked at her. "You," he said. "Yes." The Black Pine Pack is approximately 30 days from a full winter supply crisis. Their grain will run short in 3 weeks. Their salt road closes in a month. Their medicine supply ends in 6 days. Their silver mine transport is in default. Yes. And the woman who built and maintained every single one of those supply lines is currently sitting in a border way station with a rabbit in her cloak. Yes. Cale Ashbourne set down his tea. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and regarded her with an expression that contained, in carefully measured proportions, respect, calculation, and something that Seraphine could not immediately identify, but that made the broken place in her chest feel slightly less broken. "Lady Marlowe," he said, "I believe you and I have a great deal to discuss. I am no longer a lady of anything." "That," he said, "is a matter of perspective and paperwork." He stood. He was even taller standing, which seemed structurally unnecessary. "I'm riding to Iron Ridge Keep this morning. My steward has been telling me for 6 months that our border trade network needs an overhaul, and I have been ignoring him because I don't have anyone who understands supply chains well enough to do it. You clearly do." He paused. "I can offer you border passage rights, a room in the keep, access to the Merchant Guild Hall, and the legal status of a trade advisor under my protection. In return, I would like you to look at my trade routes and tell me where they're bleeding money." Seraphine stared at him. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a starting position. What you do with it is your decision." "You don't know me." "I know your work. I've been reading the trade records from the Black Pine Pack's supply chain for 6 months. I know that before you took over, their grain costs were 30% higher. I know that the Salt Road agreement you negotiated saved them 600 silver marks a year. I know that the Heartwood Carriers Guildmaster calls you the only honest dealer north of the river. And I know," he paused, and his blue eyes held hers with an intensity that made Clover thump nervously against her collarbone, "that a man who had all of that and threw it away to marry a Winterbourne is either a fool or a coward, and I don't particularly care which." The common room was very quiet. Every soldier, the innkeeper, and the old woman knitting in the chimney corner were pretending very hard not to listen. Seraphine's throat was tight. Not from tears, she would not cry in front of this man, in front of anyone, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being seen. Not pitied, not managed, not handled, seen. "I have a rabbit," she said, because she was the kind of person who disclosed potential complications up front. "I noticed. She eats cabbage leaves and thumps when she's startled. My keep has a kitchen garden. She'll fit right in." He extended his hand, not to shake, to help her stand, the way a man offers his hand when he wants a woman to know that he considers her his equal, and that the hand is offered by choice, not obligation. Seraphine looked at his hand. It was large and scarred and steady. She took it. His grip was warm and firm and lasted exactly 1 second longer than strictly necessary. When he let go, his fingers brushed her palm in a way that could have been accidental but was not. Clover thumped. "Your rabbit approves," Cale said. "My rabbit approves of very little. She merely tolerates what she cannot kick." That 1/16 of an inch smile happened a third time, and Seraphine realized, with a sensation like stepping off a cliff into unexpectedly warm water, that she wanted to make it happen again. Chapter 4: Iron Ridge Keep. Iron Ridge Keep sat on a granite bluff above the border river, where the old trade road forked, one branch running north to the settled Pack territories, the other running south to the riverport towns and the merchant guilds beyond. It was not a beautiful building. It was a functional one: thick walls, deep cellars, wide gates designed for wagons, and a stable yard that could hold 50 horses. It looked like a building that had been designed by someone who valued efficiency over aesthetics, which was exactly the kind of building Seraphine felt most comfortable in. Cale Ashbourne had given her a room in the East Tower. Not the finest room in the keep, but a good one, with a window that overlooked the river and the trade road, a fireplace that drew properly, and a desk. The desk was large. Seraphine approved of large desks. She had spent 6 years managing the Black Pine Pack's entire commercial infrastructure from a writing table that was slightly too small because Roderick had never thought to ask if she needed a bigger one. Clover was given the run of the kitchen garden, which she investigated with the methodical intensity of a land surveyor, and from which she returned each evening with dirt on her nose and an expression of profound satisfaction. Within 3 days, Seraphine had mapped the Iron Ridge trade network. Within a week, she had found where it was bleeding money. The border trade routes were a mess, not from corruption but from neglect. Cale Ashbourne was a superb military commander and a respected alpha, but he had the commercial instincts of a brick. His steward, a well-meaning man named Aldrich, had been doing his best, but his best involved paying whatever price the merchants quoted and hoping for the best. Seraphine did not hope for the best. Seraphine negotiated. She started with the grain merchants. The Iron Ridge Pack was buying winter grain from 3 separate suppliers at 3 different prices, none of which had been compared or renegotiated in 2 years. Seraphine sat in the Merchant Guild Hall, a drafty stone building in the border town below the keep, and invited all 3 suppliers to the same meeting. "Gentlemen," she said with Clover tucked invisibly under her heavy wool skirt, "I notice that you are each charging the Iron Ridge Pack a different price for the same grade of grain. This suggests either that grain quality varies dramatically between your warehouses, which would concern me, or that you have been taking advantage of the fact that no one here has bothered to compare your invoices, which would also concern me." The grain merchants looked at each other. They looked at the golden-haired woman sitting at the head of the table with her hands folded and her expression pleasant and her eyes sharp enough to cut glass. They lowered their prices, all 3 of them, voluntarily. "That," Aldrich said afterward with the dazed expression of a man who has just witnessed a miracle, "has never happened before." "It happens," Seraphine said, "when you read the invoices." By the end of the 2nd week, she had renegotiated the tallow contract, restructured the firewood supply chain, established a new credit arrangement with the Riverport warehouses, and set up a rotating delivery schedule for the border way stations that cut transport costs by 1/3. The merchants liked her. The guild leaders respected her. The border guards, who had been eating terrible food for years because no one managed the supply contracts for the waystation kitchens, practically worshipped her. Cale watched all of this. He watched from the doorways of meeting rooms, from the upper gallery of the guild hall, from the parapet of his keep where he stood in the mornings with his tea and his maps and his scar catching the winter light. He watched Seraphine Marlowe walk into rooms full of men who had been cheating his pack for years and walk out with better terms, fair prices, and signed agreements. He watched her crouch in the kitchen garden to let Clover climb into her hands, her golden hair falling over her shoulder, her face soft in a way it never was when other people were looking. He watched, and he said very little, because Cale Ashbourne was a man who understood that some things are better observed than discussed. But his soldiers noticed, Aldrich noticed, the cook noticed, the stable master noticed. Everyone in Iron Ridge Keep noticed that their alpha, who had never in anyone's memory shown personal interest in any woman, tracked Seraphine Marlowe's movements through the keep like a compass needle finding north. Chapter 5. The First Cloak. The first ambiguity-destroying moment happened 16 days after Seraphine's arrival, on the night of the first real snowstorm. She had been in the guild hall until well past dark, finalizing a salt contract with a coastal trader who had the negotiating style of a weasel and the attention span of a gnat. The deal was done. Favorable terms, reliable delivery, penalty clause for late shipments that Seraphine had insisted on because she had once waited 3 weeks for a late salt delivery and had no intention of ever doing so again, and she was walking back to the keep through the narrow streets of the border town. The snow came suddenly, as border snowstorms do, not a gentle beginning, but a wall of white, horizontal, and blinding, driven by a wind that turned the air into knives. Seraphine, who had been too focused on the salt contract to check the sky before leaving the guild hall, found herself blind and freezing in a street she barely knew. Clover, who had been riding under her skirt hem, her preferred mode of transport in cold weather, pressed against Seraphine's ankle like a warm, furry boot, began thumping. Not the small, conversational thump of contentment, the rapid, staccato thump of alarm. Thump, thump, thump. Seraphine could feel the vibration through the sole of her boot. "I know," she muttered, pressing against a building wall. "I know. I can't see either." The wind screamed. Snow plastered her hair to her face, found every gap in her cloak, bit through her gloves. The broken bond in her chest throbbed. It always throbbed more in the cold, as though the severed thread was trying to pull her back to a warmth that no longer existed. And then a cloak dropped over her shoulders. Not thrown, placed. With precision, with weight, with the careful deliberateness of a man who had practiced moving in darkness and bad weather until it was as natural to him as breathing. The cloak was enormous. Heavy, dark wool lined with fur, still warm from the body that had been wearing it, and it smelled of pine smoke and cold steel and something underneath both of those things that was simply, unmistakably, him. "The Guildhall closed an hour ago," Cale said, and his voice was very close, cutting through the wind from directly above her left ear. "I sent Aldrich to walk you back. He said you were still arguing about penalty clauses." "I won the argument." "I would have been surprised if you hadn't." His hand found her elbow, unerringly, in total darkness and blinding snow, and steadied her. "Can you walk?" "Of course I can walk." "You're shaking." "I'm cold. Those are different things." A pause. She could not see his face, but she was absolutely certain that the 16th of an inch smile was happening. "Walk with me then," he said. "The keep is 4 streets north. I know the way blind." "You came out in a blizzard to find me." "I came out in a blizzard to check the border watch. Finding you was coincidence." "You're not wearing a cloak." "I have a thick constitution." "You're standing in a blizzard in a shirt." "A heavy shirt." Seraphine wanted to argue further, but the wind chose that moment to gust so hard that she staggered, and Cale's hand on her elbow tightened, and she found herself pressed against his side, his very solid, very warm, very shirt-clad side, and his arm came around her shoulders to hold the cloak closed against the wind, and she discovered that the warmth of a large man in a snowstorm is a profoundly convincing argument against further protest. They walked. His arm stayed. Clover, from her position under Seraphine's skirt hem, produced a single, contented thump. Halfway to the keep, Seraphine became aware that Cale was shielding her from the wind with his body. Not obviously, not dramatically, but with the quiet, automatic precision of a man for whom protecting others was as reflexive as breathing. He had positioned himself on her windward side. His arm across her shoulders was angled to block the snow from hitting her face. He was, she realized, freezing. "You should take your cloak back," she said. "No. You'll get frostbite. I'll get warm by the fire." "You are the most stubborn." This, from a woman who argued about penalty clauses for 3 hours in a room with a dying fire. The fire was adequate. The fire was 2 embers and an optimistic stick. She laughed. It was a small, involuntary sound, startled out of her by the sheer absurdity of standing in a blizzard, arguing about fire quality with a man who had given her his cloak and was pretending he wasn't cold. It was the first time she had laughed since the Moonvow Hall, and the sound of it surprised her so much that she stopped walking. Cale stopped too. In the narrow space between snow gusts, she caught a glimpse of his face, snow in his dark hair, ice on his scar, and his blue eyes looking at her with an expression that was not the 16th of an inch smile. It was something larger, something unguarded, something that he shut down almost immediately, but not quite fast enough. He had been looking at her the way Roderick used to look at her, except that Roderick's version of that look had always contained, underneath the warmth, a flicker of something wary, a man admiring a fire that he feared might burn him. Cale's version contained no fear at all. "We should keep walking," he said, and his voice was perfectly steady. because Cale Ashbourne could control his voice the way other men controlled their sword arms. They kept walking. His arms stayed around her shoulders. The cloak smelled like pine smoke and cold steel in him, and Seraphine stored that information in the same part of her mind where she kept her most important accounts, the things too valuable to write down, in case someone tried to take them away. Chapter 6: The Rotting Pack. While Seraphine was building trade routes and accepting cloaks from blue-eyed border kings, the Black Pine Pack was dying. Not literally, not yet, but the slow, grinding death of a community that has lost its infrastructure and doesn't realize it until the food runs out. The grain ran short in the third week, exactly as Seraphine had predicted. The river merchants declined to renew the credit arrangement without Seraphine's personal guarantee, exactly as she had warned. The Salt Road closed when the Greymark elders received no renewal request from anyone they recognized, and the medicine supply from the Ashwick herb women ended when the payment was 6 days late. The silver mine wagons stopped coming on the 22nd day. Roderick Blackpine discovered, in the sharp and unforgiving classroom of consequence, that running a pack required more than being tall, handsome, and commanding. It required knowing where the food came from. It required knowing who to pay and when and how much. It required knowing that the cobbler who made boots for the pack's children at cost did so because someone delivered his wife's cheese to market, and that if the cheese deliveries stopped, the boots stopped, and if the boots stopped, children walked barefoot in snow. It required, in short, Seraphine Marlowe. And Seraphine Marlowe was gone. Alara Winterbourne, to her credit, was not entirely useless. She was, in fact, much more capable than Roderick had expected, but her capabilities lay in a direction that made his blood run cold as the winter deepened. She began with the pack's debts. The Black Pine Pack owes 2,000 silver marks to the Heartwood Carriers Guild, she told Roderick on the fourth morning, her voice soft and measured, her pale eyes scanning a ledger that she had produced from her own traveling case. And 1,400 marks to the river merchants, and 800 to the Salt Road Licensing Authority. Total outstanding obligations, 4,200 marks. Roderick stared at her. I didn't know. Your former Luna managed these debts personally. She kept them rolling through a combination of personal guarantees, bartered services, and partial payments timed to cash flow projections. Alara set the ledger down. She was, I must admit, remarkably skilled. Can you do the same? I could, she folded her hands. But it would be simpler to consolidate. Consolidate how? My family's banking house can purchase the outstanding debts from the individual creditors. Instead of owing money to a dozen different people, the Black Pine Pack would owe money to one, the Winterbourne family. She smiled. It was a lovely smile, warm and reassuring and utterly without warmth. It's more efficient. Roderick, who did not understand debt consolidation the way Seraphine would have, and who was too proud to admit this, agreed. This was the second worst decision he had ever made. The first was letting Seraphine walk out of the Moonvow Hall. Because Alara Winterbourne had not come to the Black Pine Pack to be a Luna. She had come to be a locksmith, fitting the tumblers of debt and dependency into place until the entire pack was a door that her family could open at will. Within 2 weeks, the Winterbourne family held every major debt the Black Pine Pack owed. The grain supply was rerouted through Winterbourne warehouses at prices that were technically fair but practically ruinous. The pack's guard rotation was supplemented by Northern soldiers for the pack's protection during this difficult transition, who answered to Alara's family steward, not to Roderick. The pack's treasury key, which Roderick had always carried, was placed in a lockbox to which Alara held the second key as a precaution against the debts. She was absorbing the pack, piece by piece, contract by contract, coin by coin, and she was doing it with such impeccable courtesy, such flawless legal justification, and such a beautifully concerned expression that Roderick did not fully understand what was happening until the day he tried to authorize a firewood purchase and was told by his own steward that the purchase needed Lady Winterbourne's countersignature. She controls the countersignature? Roderick said, and his voice was very quiet. His steward, a nervous man who had replaced the previous steward, who had been loyal to Seraphine and had been reassigned to stable duty by Alara's suggestion, nodded miserably. Roderick sat in his study, which had once been Seraphine's study before it was his, and which still smelled faintly of the lavender sachet she had kept in the desk drawer, and he thought about what he had done. He had traded a woman who loved his pack for a woman who was buying it. Chapter 7. The Stone Keep Accounts. The fourth week brought two things to Iron Ridge Keep, the first snow thaw and the old Black Pine records keeper. His name was Osric, and he was 73 years old, and he had served the Black Pine Pack for 50 of those years as historian, archivist, and keeper of the ancient pack charter. He arrived at Iron Ridge on a mule, wearing a coat that had been patched so many times it resembled a quilt with aspirations, and carrying a leather case that he held against his chest as though it contained his own heart. "Lady Marlowe," he said when Seraphine met him in the keep's great hall, and his old voice cracked on her name. "I'm not Lady Marlowe anymore, Osric." You are, because he never filed the severance." Seraphine went very still. "What?" Osric opened the leather case with trembling fingers and pulled out a sheet of parchment. Old, official, bearing the Black Pine Pack's seal. When an alpha dissolves a mate bond and removes a Luna from her position, the ancient charter requires a formal severance to be recorded by the pack historian and witnessed by 3 elders. The alpha must sign it. The historian must seal it. Until this is done, the former Luna retains her legal standing as a member of the pack. He held up the parchment. It was blank, unsigned, unsealed. "He forgot," Osric said. "He was so busy with the new Luna and the northern contracts and the spectacle of it all that he forgot to complete the severance. I waited. I prepared the document. He never came to sign it." Seraphine's mind was doing what it always did in moments of crisis, running calculations at a speed that would have made an abacus weep. If the severance was never completed, she was still, legally, under the ancient Black Pine Charter, a member of the pack, not Luna. She had publicly relinquished the title, but a member. With membership came certain rights, including the right to invoke the Charter's most ancient and least used provision, the right of stewardship. "Osric," she said slowly, "the stewardship clause." The old man's eyes lit up. Chapter 7, Article 3. When the Alpha's governance endangers the pack's survival through debt, famine, or loss of sovereign territory, any full member of the pack may petition for temporary stewardship, provided they can demonstrate both the means and the intent to restore the pack to solvency. And if the Alpha has incurred debts that threaten to transfer pack lands to an outside family, the stewardship petitioner may acquire those debts and present them as evidence of the Alpha's unfitness, triggering a public tribunal. Seraphine looked at the unsigned severance document. She looked at Osric. She looked at the account ledger in her satchel, which contained every debt, every credit, every supply line, and every contact she had built over 6 years. "Osric," she said, "I need you to tell me the exact amount of every debt the Winterbourne family has purchased from the Black Pine Pack's creditors." Osric told her. Seraphine sat down at her large, beautiful desk in Iron Ridge Keep, opened her account ledger, and began to plan. That night, she was still working when Cale found her. The account room in the East Tower was lit by 4 candles and a fire that had burned low. Seraphine was surrounded by papers, debt records, charter copies, trade route maps, supply calculations. Her golden hair had come loose from its braid and was falling across the ledger she was writing in, and she was so absorbed that she did not hear Cale enter until he set a cup of tea on the desk beside her. She startled. Clover, who had been sleeping under the desk in a nest of discarded draft paper, thumped once. "It's past midnight," Cale said. "I'm aware. You've been in here since supper. You didn't eat supper." "I ate bread." "A bread crust does not constitute supper. It constitutes bread, which is a component of supper." He pulled a chair from the corner, set it beside hers, close but not touching, and sat. He looked at the papers spread across the desk, and Seraphine watched his blue eyes move over the numbers, the contracts, the charter language, with the quick, sharp comprehension of a man who might not love commerce but understood power. "You're buying the Black Pine debts," he said. "I'm considering it." "With what funds?" "My personal savings, my trade commissions from the past 6 years, and," she hesitated, "a loan." "From?" "I don't know yet." Cale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll fund it." Seraphine turned to look at him. They were very close. Close enough that she could see the individual threads of silver in his blue eyes, close enough to smell the pine smoke on his shirt, close enough that when he shifted his weight, his knee brushed hers under the desk. "I can't accept that," she said. "Why not?" "Because it would make me beholden to you, and I have spent 6 years being beholden to a man who used my competence and discarded my person, and I will not." "It's not a gift, it's an investment." His voice was steady. "I invest in the Black Pine debt acquisition. When you take stewardship of the pack, you fold the Black Pine trade routes into the border network, which benefits my territory. I get a return on my investment through reduced trade costs and increased traffic. It's business." Seraphine stared at him. She knew it was not entirely business. She could see it in the set of his jaw, in the way his hand rested on the desk near hers, not touching, but close, as though it was taking conscious effort to maintain the distance. "And if I fail?" she asked. "You won't." "You don't know that." "I know you argued about salt contract penalty clauses for 3 hours with a dying fire. You don't fail, you outlast." From under the desk, Clover thumped. Then, slowly, she hopped out from her paper nest, crossed the cold stone floor, and climbed onto Cale's boot. He looked down. Clover looked up. She was sitting on his boot like a small, furry auditor, her dark cherry eyes fixed on his face, her nose twitching. She thumped once, not the alarm thump, not the contentment thump, the assessment thump, the thump that said, "I am evaluating you, and you should be aware that my standards are high." Cale, slowly and carefully, reached down and offered his hand, palm up. Clover sniffed his fingers. She sniffed for a long time, an unreasonably long time, as though she were conducting a thorough olfactory background check. Then she pressed her nose against his knuckle and hopped off his boot. "She approves," Seraphine said, and her voice was softer than she had intended. "Does her approval matter?" "It does to me." They looked at each other across the desk. The fire crackled, the candles flickered, the papers rustled in a draft from the window, and outside, the border wind carried the sound of the river and the distant howl of wolves in the wild country. "Take the loan," Cale said. "On what terms?" "Standard interest, 1-year repayment, no personal obligations." He paused. "I won't use money to own you, Seraphine. No one will ever use anything to own you again." It was the first time he had used her given name. It sounded different in his voice, not smaller the way it had sometimes sounded in Roderick's mouth, as though he were trying to contain it, but larger, expansive, like a name that had room to grow. "All right," she said. "All right? I accept the loan, standard terms, and I want the interest rate in writing before dawn." The 16th of an inch smile became, for the first time, a full smile. It transformed his face. It made him look younger, warmer, and so devastatingly handsome that Seraphine's stomach did something structurally inadvisable. "I'll have it drafted," he said, and stood, and his hand brushed her shoulder as he passed, the lightest possible touch, barely there, a whisper of warmth through her wool sleeve. She did not sleep that night, but the reason had changed. Chapter 8. The Salt Road Gambit. Seraphine Marlowe bought the Black Pine Pack's debts in 8 days. It was, by any standard, a masterpiece of financial warfare. She approached each creditor personally, the Heartwood Carriers Guild, the river merchants, the Salt Road Authority, the medicine suppliers, and purchased their claims on the Black Pine Pack at a discount. The creditors were happy to sell. They had no confidence in Roderick Blackpine's ability to pay. They had no relationship with Alara Winterbourne, and they trusted Seraphine implicitly. The total cost was 3,600 marks, less than the face value of the debts, because Seraphine negotiated discounts with the same ruthless efficiency she applied to grain contracts. Kale's loan covered the bulk of it. Her personal savings covered the rest. When it was done, Seraphine held every debt that Alara Winterborn had purchased from the original creditors. Because Alara had bought the debts from the same people Seraphine had relationships with, and Seraphine had simply offered to buy the debts from Alara's family at a price slightly higher than what the Winterborns had paid, making it look like a profitable exit rather than a strategic defeat. The Winterborns, who thought in terms of interest rates rather than relationships, accepted the buyout. They did not realize until later that they had just sold their entire leverage over the Black Pine pack to the woman the pack had thrown away. "You bought our own debts out from under us?" Alara's steward said, staring at the signed transfer documents that Seraphine's courier had delivered to the Black Pine pack hall. "I bought them from your family, yes. At a profit to your family. Your Lord Father should be pleased." The steward was not pleased. Alara Winterborn, when she heard, was significantly less pleased. And Lord Aldous Winterborn, the patriarch of the Northern family, who had spent 3 months engineering the perfect acquisition of a vulnerable pack in its territory, was so profoundly displeased that he broke a quill and had to sit down. But the documents were signed. The law was clear. The debts belonged to Seraphine Marlowe. While the debt acquisition was unfolding, 2 women arrived at Iron Ridge Keep. The first was Marta, the former warehouse keeper of the Black Pine Pack's central grain store. She was a broad-shouldered woman in her 40s with calloused hands and a face like a friendly boulder. She had managed the Black Pine granary for 15 years, knew every sack of grain by weight and origin, and had been dismissed by Alara Winterborn and replaced with a northern-appointed manager who didn't know the difference between winter wheat and spring barley. "They fired me," Marta said, standing in Seraphine's account room with her hat in her hands and her chin trembling. "After 15 years. The northern woman said they were restructuring warehouse operations, which apparently means replacing everyone who knows anything with people who don't, but who answer to her." "How bad is the granary?" Seraphine asked. 2 weeks of supplies, maybe less. The northern grain shipments are coming, but they're delayed and the quality is poor. I saw the manifests before they locked me out. Half of it is feed grain, not milling grain. The pack will have bread, but it'll be the kind of bread that breaks teeth. The second arrival was Brenna, a widow from the border town who ran a small caravan operation, 3 wagons, 5 drivers, and a reputation for delivering anything, anywhere, in any weather. She was 50 years old, had 4 arms like a blacksmith, and had been trying to get a trade license from the Iron Ridge Border Authority for 2 years. "I heard you're the woman who's reorganizing the border trade," Brenna said, standing in the guild hall with her arms crossed and her gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense knot. "I also heard you're the woman the Black Pine Alpha threw out on her ear at the Moon Vow, which makes you either the unluckiest woman in the borderlands or the most interesting. I'm betting on interesting." Seraphine liked her immediately. "I need a grain run," Seraphine said. "Fast, reliable, and quiet. 40 wagons of good grain from the Riverport warehouses to a staging point on the Black Pine border. Can you do it?" 40 wagons? Brenna's eyebrows rose. "That's a full winter supply for a medium pack." "Yes." "When?" "Before the tribunal." Brenna grinned. It was the grin of a woman who had been waiting her entire life for someone to ask her to do something this ambitious. "I'll do it in 12 days, she said. "But I want the trade license." "Done." Brenna left. Marta stayed, and Seraphine put her to work organizing the grain logistics, purchase orders, quality checks, wagon assignments, delivery schedules. Marta was thrilled. She had not been this useful since being fired, and usefulness was the air she breathed. "It's like old times," Marta said, sorting manifests with the speed of a woman who dreamed in inventory counts. "Except better. Because this time, the person I'm working for actually knows what she's doing and appreciates it." Seraphine looked up from her ledger. "Roderick appreciated your work." "Roderick didn't know I existed until the granary was empty. You knew my name on your second day." Marta paused. That's the difference, Lady Marlowe. You see the people who keep things running. He only saw the things. Chapter 9. The Riding Lesson. On the 29th day, Cale took Seraphine to inspect the southern trade route. This was technically a business necessity. The southern route ran through a mountain pass that was critical to the grain shipments Brenna was organizing, and Seraphine needed to see the terrain, the bridge conditions, and the way station capacity. It was also less technically the first time they had been alone together outside the keep since the night of the blizzard cloak. The southern pass was beautiful and terrible. A narrow road cut into the side of a granite gorge with the river roaring 100 feet below and the mountain rising sheer above. The winter sun turned the ice on the rocks into diamonds, and the air was so cold and clean that breathing it felt like drinking water from a glacial stream. Seraphine was a competent rider, but she was not a mountain rider. The border horses were different from the gentle, road-trained animals she had ridden in the Black Pine lowlands. They were sure-footed, opinionated, and alarmingly comfortable with heights. Her horse, a gray mare named Slate, who had the personality of a mildly intoxicated duchess, decided halfway through the pass that the best route was 6 inches from the edge of a 200-foot cliff. "Pull her left," Cale said from behind her. "I am pulling her left. She is ignoring me." "She's testing you. Pull harder." "If I pull any harder, I will pull myself off this horse and into the gorge." Cale brought his horse alongside hers. There was barely room for 2 horses abreast on the narrow road, which meant his leg was pressed against hers, his shoulder almost touching hers, and his hand was available to reach over and steady her reins. He did reach over. His hand closed over hers on the reins, large and warm and absolutely steady, and he guided the mare away from the edge with a calm, practiced pressure that the horse immediately respected. "She listens to you," Seraphine said, and she was annoyed to discover that her voice was slightly breathless and not from the altitude. "She listens to confidence. Horses and wolves are the same. They follow the person who believes they know where they're going." "I know where I'm going." "I know you do." His hand was still on hers. The reins were steady. The horse was walking calmly. There was no practical reason for his hand to remain. It remained. "You can let go," Seraphine said. "I could." "The horse is fine." "The horse is fine." "Then why?" "Because your hand is cold and mine is warm, and I am choosing to interpret this as a practical concern rather than an emotional one." Seraphine turned her head to look at him. He was very close, close enough that she could count the shades of blue in his eyes, close enough to see the way the winter light caught on the fine scar across his cheekbone. He was looking at her with that expression again, the one from the blizzard, the one that contained no fear. "Is it a practical concern?" she asked. "Absolutely. Frostbitten fingers cannot sign contracts, and you have a tribunal to prepare for." "That is the most unromantic thing anyone has ever said to me." "I am a deeply unromantic man." His thumb moved across the back of her hand. Once, slowly. "Ask anyone." From beneath Seraphine's heavy riding skirt there was a soft, rapid thumping. Thump, thump, thump. Clover had strong opinions about the current situation. Cale looked at Seraphine's skirt. He looked at Seraphine. The full smile appeared again, the one that transformed his entire face and made Seraphine's internal organs rearrange themselves. "Your chaperone disapproves," he said. "My chaperone approves. That's the approval thump." "How many thumps does she have?" 7. I have a chart." He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh, a real laugh, deep and warm, caught off guard by a woman with a rabbit under her skirt and a chart of rabbit thumps. The sound echoed off the granite walls of the gorge and came back to them like a gift. They rode the rest of the pass in silence, but his hand did not leave hers until they reached the valley floor, and when it finally did, she felt its absence like a change in temperature. Chapter 10. The Unwelcome Visitor.